Have you already registered at Wikisana?
I warmly welcome you. Nice to have you with us. Welcome to the Natural Medicine format. Today I have Marco Klein as my guest, co-developer of Klein Fields and founder of BioRelax. Today we want to talk about what the Klein Fields can do in relation to or in the case of the disease thrombosis. In a positive sense, of course. We are very curious and will now hear from Marco Klein in person. See you in a moment. Hello dear Marco, nice to have you back. Thank you very much.
Hello.
Today we have taken up the topic of thrombosis. This is a vessel disease.
Yes, half.
You will tell us more about it in a moment. But at least I hear it intensified in the last 2-3 years that people suffer from thrombosis. And of course it is all the more relevant to find a way to prevent it or so that it doesn't even come to that. As already briefly mentioned, you tell us a little bit about what we can understand under thrombosis.
Yes, thrombosis is simply a blood clot. So when different structures, i.e., blood cells, or also proteins, fats, so different things, are practically crumbling to a blood clot, to a clot, like a lump, you could say. That is perhaps the simplest term. A lump that forms. This can be for various reasons. But if such a blood clot just clogs a vessel, like a cork in that form, then of course it massively prevents blood flow. And that can take place anywhere in the body. If you don't have a good blood flow, maybe you have thick blood, various factors, narrowed vessels. Maybe we get to that. Then it leads to the fact that when not so small microthrombos, i.e., these very small lumps, as is often the case, they may still swim relatively well in the large vessels. They clog the very small vessels at most. That's also a problem, of course. But what you call arteries, there are arteries in the body and there are veins. The arteries lead the oxygen-rich blood to the cells and the veins the used blood back to the heart. And there can be these blood clots that clog the arteries. Very often, in fact, and that's why people often say vein thrombosis, because it can also affect the veins very often. The big problem is actually when these blood clots form there and then clog. Then it can lead to a real lung embolism or even a stroke. Even if I have it in my leg and there is a closure in my leg, a vein thrombosis, it can affect the lung. It's not just a topic in the legs where many recognize it that way. It can have very major side effects. That's why thrombosis is a bit unforeseen, a very dangerous disease. It shocked me when I looked it up. Every year 500,000 people die in Europe. So only in Europe, 500,000 people die every year from thrombosis. Because thrombosis then triggers a lung embolism or a stroke. In most cases of lung embolism, it is a clogging through such blood clots. You mentioned it, it has increased immensely in the last 2 or 3 years. The connections, you don't want to say it out loud, when you get one or the other on your arm, it has already increased a lot. That's why, if the thrombosis is there, it's an acute emergency. But many already have circulatory disorder. It is important to take good care of yourself. There are different possibilities.
You just mentioned that many already have a circulatory disorder. Who is primarily predestined for it or endangered?
First of all, there are both women and men, although women are more often affected. Unfortunately, women have the worst of many diseases. I'll explain a few differences. It's interesting, men get it too. It doesn't depend on age. Young athletes get it just like older people. But it is rarer in young people. From 40 it increases significantly. Then there are different main factors. You know they are not good for it. One is the issue of little movement. In the 50s, where the blood circulation gets worse, there is a 20-fold risk of it. Because of little movement. A walk is enough. The muscles pump the blood with the heart. The metabolism is a bit in gear. The pumping movement of the vessels is also supported. Then the flow is different than when I'm just sitting or lying. Then there are factors. There are problems with the plane. The legs are bent. The blood circulation is not optimal. The legs bend, like in the car. But in the plane, there is even lower air pressure. Because you have little movement, you don't pump much. But that's not just in the plane. You know that. Thrombosis stockings when flying. But in general, am I overweight? Do I smoke? That's not good for the vessels. We are talking about blood clots. But because you said it at the beginning, with the vessels, they play a very important role. I can show you something. If you look at the blood clots, you can see that very well. Then there is also the deposit in the vessels. I call it a tube. When lime deposits, as you sometimes say, you are already so limed. That is the deposit, the plaque that forms there. That can narrow the vessel. The vessels, with age, it is natural that liming forms. The difference is that someone who is not in good health, not good nutrition, not so much movement, overweight, smoking, various factors, stress, the vessels narrow more. The narrower it is, the greater the danger. Everyone will have these small lumps more or less. If you drink little, the blood is also thicker. Several things come together that can lead to a closure. Or at least this obstacle that the blood flow is no longer good.
Do some people have a genetic disposition for this?
Certainly. It's a lot about the vessels. A narrowing of the vessels means that the blood pressure rises, so that the blood can still get through at a good speed. But as a risk factor, when the blood flow rate slows down, then it's like in the cars. If someone suddenly brakes in front, then they all have to brake off one after the other. Then a kind of blood congestion forms. The blood may still flow through, it does not stop completely. These deposits are more likely to form due to this oxygen-depleted blood. It does not run through so much, does not supply the cells. It comes through very sluggishly. Then the deposits form. The blood lingers longer, can adhere more to the vessels. The vessels generally play a role in health. In old age, unfortunately, it is the case. From 50, the blood flow generally does really downhill. This is because the vessels are no longer so elastic. They stiffen. The diameter is usually smaller. Every time the blood is pressed through with a pumping movement through the heart, it has to flow through. This makes it difficult for the body. That's why these blood clots form. Especially in the veins, many know this as varicose veins. This superficial one on the skin. There are the superficial and the internal. But superficially you can see it. If they push outwards, because the blood is stowed in there, they stretch apart because of the amount. Because it doesn't really go with the drain. There are also aspects when I have thick blood with narrowed vessels. Most of the time, both come together due to various factors. Stress, maybe not drinking a lot. Drinking water is also important. Then several things come together. That's why the thrombosis is most unconscious as a problem. You think circulation is something that has to run. That's not a problem. I don't have a headache, I don't have this. But it's much more than you think. Especially the microcirculation, the finest circulation, where it goes very badly if you have thick blood anyway. Many notice that. Whether it's cramping veins, fatigue, heavy legs, swelling. A real thrombosis, which is an emergency, where you have to go to the hospital quickly, where they try to dissolve these blood clots with medication quickly. The prevention of this would be the important thing. If I keep the blood flow, the deposits don't form so extreme. That makes the most sense. If the problem is acute, you have to go to the doctor or hospital immediately, because it has to be worked on quickly. You notice, if people notice, the legs get firmer. The skin becomes a bit more glassy, because she gets a slight swelling. It can even turn reddish-brown in this form. It also becomes warmer, like a kind of inflammation. This makes you notice that there is a pressure pain. The doctor will probably do that first. Look and press, because it occurs very often in the calf area. The legs are very strongly affected, as with many other diseases. That's why you can see it relatively quickly, as a doctor, to do something about it. But the general circulation is the key.
You notice that you have a thrombosis. Heavy legs and so on. There are also compression stumps. Many people recommend it as a remedy, well remedy but as a measure. Does that really help?
Yes, there are curse and blessing at the same time. The thrombosis, as some say, compression stumps, I have to wear the rubber stumps again. They help in that they compress the tissue, so that it doesn't come apart so loosely, especially in summer, due to high temperatures. Some people use it in the plane, because the pressure together makes the blood flow faster. If I give the body less opportunity to go apart loosely, then it can flow faster. In the garden hose, if you put your thumb on it, it sprays out much further. Then the pressure goes higher. Compression stumps are positive for this, but they have other disadvantages. Many use it as a solution. Otherwise they don't know how to improve through blood circulation, where Klein fields are a big topic. Problem is, do I wear it very often? Not always, but often. Then the tissue gets used to it. It says, I'm being supported too nicely. There is a binding tissue. The binding tissue is a kind of rigidity. That's why you have young, rigid tissue at 20. And with age you notice, it's getting more and more wrinkled. The binding teases off. Collagen. It is not produced well, especially for women atopic. If I support this binding tissue all the time, like support wheels, the body gets used to it. Then I don't have to worry about my binding tissue. Then there is the devil's circle. It gets worse when you let it go. So selective, to fly or certain phases, or to help the body a little. It's positive, but it's not a permanent solution. Anyone who sells it as it is, it's not. You should look at how you stimulate the circulation. Hot, cold, shower. There are various variants. But that only helps occasionally. Not bad, but it's a physical problem. If the circulation doesn't work, we have concentrated on this.
I only know these compression stumps from the hospital. From the last wrist fracture of the operation. I couldn't imagine that permanently.
They do it pro forma often. If you have thrombosis, you should keep calm. Don't lie down. Then the blood comes even less into motion. That's why you try it when muscles work less. When you can't move that well. It can be positive. But in most cases it is not necessary.
But you have a lot there. You are very, very diligent in your research. With the Klein'sche fields, what can they do? How is your experience in the context of thrombosis?
It is important to understand that it is about two things. It's about the blood flow and the vessels. Both have to be healthy. If I have narrowed vessels, I can have a good blood flow. Then I can catch one or the other. But healthy vessels and a positive blood flow, like with high blood pressure and co. These are important topics. A bad blood flow. You can also see how deposits can form. This is shown schematically. Because the vessels also consist of cells. You don't think about that. You think about cells in the tissue. The more oxygen-rich blood goes through, the better they are supplied. Now it's stopped. If I have the movement constantly in this form, the supply of the vessels and the tissue is better. These stuffings do not form. For example, veins. They don't have to expand, because there is so much blood in the form. Like with cramping veins, it has to be pumped up. If the valves don't close properly, then there are such blood clots. That's why so many have it in the leg area. The circulation is worse there anyway, because it is very far from the heart. I found it funny as an anecdote. There were sources who saw in studies that small people are more rarely affected. In relation, the bigger the people were, the bigger the problem. Many small people still have the problem. It was a small difference. And what was interesting about the ethnic groups, dark-skinned people have a bigger problem. We are in the European area, all very light-skinned. But it was still interesting that South Americans or Asians have less problems than Africans or dark-skinned Americans. Genetically, there will be some reasons. You don't know yet, but one could observe. But that helps those who have it. 500,000 deaths alone in Europe.
500,000.
It's madness. You can't imagine. Of course, by stroke and lung embolism. Because this clogging leads to something else. I have it in the brain, then strokes. If I have venous thrombosis, then lung embolism, and so on. It can take many forms. It can also take place in the body. We talk a lot about the legs, although it can also be in the shoulder. Many people perceive it as a pain. They say I may not have thrombosis, but I often have a pull or an uncomfortable feeling. When I press on the legs, I notice it hurts. Especially when you come into a rest phase. Especially there. These are the small thromboses. They don't completely close the vessel. But you notice that something is going through. Many feel that. The nerves run on the outer walls of the vessel. This makes it noticeable.
Can you explain to us again what exactly Klein'sche fields do for the blood flow?
For people seeing you for the first time,
This is a medical technology that is based on permanent magnetic fields. This is not typical magnetic field therapy. That would be different. These are permanent magnetic fields. In the exchange, plus and minus fields are incorporated. Every few millimeters changes from plus to minus. Plus to minus. Now we have moving structures in the body, like blood. Day and night, the heart doesn't stop pumping. Keeps the whole thing moving. The blood is electrically conductive. It has minus ions, these red blood cells, energetically charged. If they go over plus, minus, then a push-pull happens. Like in magnetism, you learn from physics class. Minus and minus push each other off. Minus and plus poles attract. Push-pull over a few millimeters, quite a lot happens in the blood. Energy is created. You can measure that. The red blood cells use that. If we talk about the thick blood, these are negatively charged. So minus charged. The red blood cells want to keep a distance from each other. They don't want to be in a clump. This money rolling formation, you can measure it with a dark field microscope even. This accumulation through the slow blood flow, where the blood accumulates and forms clumps. If I can activate the blood, electrically conductive, like hemoglobin, iron, therefore minus ions, then something happens. Due to this measurable energy, if these red blood cells are very weak, they don't have much strength to keep away from each other. Well, then we hug, whatever. But if they have a lot of energy, which the Klein fields inputs, then they disperse from each other. They say I want to have their own surface. I have to bind oxygen. This is not only a problem in the supply of cells. It starts with the lung. The blood comes in there. It should collect the oxygen. Many think it's just about that with supplementation. No, oxygen is the most important thing for the cell. If this thick, poorly flowing blood get in these so-called capillaries, these finest hair vessels, 7 times thinner than a hair. You can see them under a microscope. A doctor with an ultrasound does not see that. If the blood does not get in so well, because small lumps form, they can have different sizes. When I breathe in, the blood has to go to my lungs and take the oxygen, bind on the surface and transport to the cells. If it is clumped, it either comes in badly or not at all. Only part of the blood comes in, or there is not so much binding. There are different topics. But the fact is, it has to be picked up. It has to arrive there and be brought back. For detoxification. That's an important point. That's why the circulation is such a key factor. Because it influences all processes in the body.
Yes. Where are the best or greatest successes to be recorded? You have different products. There are the mats you sleep on. There are the footrests. Which has the best effect?
It depends on what you want to achieve. If I put something on my legs and improve blood flow, I can work with individual pads locally. The most successful is the sleeping mat because it affects the whole body. It does not only support circulation in one area. It does that to the whole body. Lungs as mentioned. If I can circulate through the intestine better, nutrients are better resorbed. Detoxification in the body organs, which can work differently. Circulation is important everywhere. The sleeping mat is the most important for many, especially when you sleep on it. Because the problem is often the case at night. The sleeping mat is a system. You can do something locally. There are soles, but they are more specific for the feet. There are more for foot pain, swelling, and so on. Lymphs, which can also cause swelling. The thick legs, which some notice. Also with thrombosis. The swollen legs often have bad circulation. The lymph flow does not run well from the tissue. Water is stored because it is poorly transported. It is a chain of many things. But I can improve circulation throughout a larger body area. That's why it's about the area. The more Klein-flied areas I have, the more I can do. If I have it only on the feet, I have warm feet. I maybe have less pain. But the circulation in other areas is not good. If I declump the blood somewhere, it can't absorb enough energy to get through the whole body. That's why with the circulation in particular. Klein-Schiff fields also have other effects. Concentration, etc. That would not be so area dependent. But the blood has to pass through actively changing areas. Otherwise it becomes so abstract. As a permanent area, plus and minus. These are the hills that form there. Different field strengths, pole arrangements. A lot of changes in there. If blood runs through the tissue, it runs through this, let's call it mountains. You don't feel that. It goes through the skin into the upper tissue. It is a constant field, like the magnetic field of the Earth. Something very natural, not electromagnetic field, which would involve radiation. You don't have that here. The blood runs through these changing fields and can experience this declumping. If the thrombosis is there, Klein-flies would not be the first treatment. But for thick blood, the blood clots that many have, the deposits do not form in the vessels. A good blood flow is important for that, especially in the 50+ area. It becomes very important for many. If you have areas over 70, then many need it urgently. They usually know that. But many with 55, 60 can't imagine it yet, because it goes down rapidly. But once problems with circulation start, then you have problems at several points. You can't understand why you are so tired, because the oxygen is not transported. The least would think about the circulation here. Because of the blood flow, the mineral building, the stress, the lack of drinking. There are several aspects. Bad blood flow nowadays already have young people. Due to electrosmog, mobile radiation. All of this has an impact. Many factors. And because it is a physical problem, I can solve it physically. Don't have to use chemicals. One could use blood thinners, it's often said. It's a great word, which the industry thought of. It sounds like thinning blood. That's not quite right. It decomposes the coagulants. It is made more fluid with chemicals. But when these clotting factors, due to poor, slow blood flow, more deposits can form. So technically yes, it dilutes it, but it doesn't solve the issue of the actual basic supply the blood is brought into the flow. But if you cut your finger, you can wait a long time until a wound closes. The coagulation factors are not there. Patients have to stop taking it weeks before the operation. Otherwise they bleed out on the table. It is not natural. Therefore we should try to keep the blood flow naturally. If we all eat healthy, if there is no stress, not chemically, no dye from clothes, from the carpet or wood protection, if we didn't have all of that, if we move, the blood flow is better obviously. With age it gets worse. But the fewest have good condition, even if they have enough movement, even if they eat healthy, if they use supplements. We have experienced so many cases where people do a lot for their health. I have a genetic disposition. I have had cramping veins already during the pregnancy. They realize that it doesn't get better with age. That's why it's getting more and more important for many people to do something actively. The loads are increasing. Who has no stress nowadays? You don't always have the food you need. 600 to 700 grams of fruit and vegetables every day. You have to be honest. You don't usually make it. The movement may not be optimal. Some have too much movement. There are other problems, like acid reflux. There are various aspects. The circulation is important in the area 50 plus. Before, not so much. The thrombosis is also very rare for young people. But from 40, I would say from 50, there you observe it more. The higher the age, the worse it gets. Then it's really serious. Someone who had to do with blood clots, it also hurts. Sometimes they are only cosmetic. Sometimes there are problems. That's no fun. The 500,000 dead don't come from anywhere. Just the number is so shocking. You can't imagine that the circulation has such a big impact. It's important to take care of microcirculation.
If our viewers would like to have advice, where can they find you?
On the internet. Klein, you can find information about the technology. What does it do? Why is it so good? They are medical products. It has a reason, the studies and such. BioRelax is the brand. You can find us in Germany or Switzerland. You can ask.
Thank you for this very informative conversation about thrombosis. It's always good to support your body in its efforts. That's the most important thing. It's the blood flow. It's the goal of our body.
That's probably what you mean by the blood flow. In comparison, they have an idea of what's going on. It's important visually. You can talk a lot. Circulation is a topic you can't really grip. But with a visualization.
I agree. Pictures say more than 1,000 words.
That's right.
That's how you get an idea of what's going on in our body. If you can say that at all. A lot of good things happen in our body. The body does so much. And he deserves that we take care of it.
The varicose veins experiences show that. There are great successes. Many got to Kleinsche flights because of them. It has to do with blood flow. It's the same basic topic. Thrombosis is just these clumps. It's a different term for thick blood. It goes on. But there's a lot to it.
Thank you very much. I'm looking forward to the next time. What you will bring us.
Thank you very much.
I wish you all the best. Thank you for being here. I wish you to be careful. Be careful and loving. Invest in the right things that bring you something positive. That's the appeal. All the best. Goodbye.